Afrocestor. Learn, unlearn, relearn, repeat.
Welcome again to Law and Order. Law and Order is an episode of the Afrocestor podcast. And the Afrocestor podcast is where we learn. This is also where we unlearn. This is where we relearn and repeat the process for growth and development. So today we're having a partnership, and this is the first of its kind. And this is a partnership between Afrocestor and Osuji and Smith Lawyers. And Osuji and Smith Lawyers are a very famous law firm. And this is in a bid to bring legal education to our immigrant community here in Canada. So today we'll be discussing quite a few things, but top of the line will be pathways to Canada, understanding the Canadian immigration categories. And our host today, Osuji and Smith Lawyers, have provided us with a knowledgeable guest. She's a guest speaker, an amiable-looking woman as well, and by name, Rowan Fisher. Rowan Fisher is actually the managing lawyer for the immigration division of Osuji and Smith Lawyers. So, Rowan, how are you doing today?
I am so well, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we were having a lot of fun behind the cameras, before the camera started rolling. Probably I thought maybe would have let the cameras roll a little bit so that you tell me more or tell the viewers more about Saudi Arabia, but we're going to get to that.
Sure.
And for our viewers, if you intend to know more about Rowan Fisher, please stay till the end of this particular episode. But first, kindly share, kindly like and subscribe. This helps us a lot to spread the message across to as many people as possible. My name is Amari, the Amari that you guys know, and you guys have been supporting a long time ago since we started Afrocestor. But before we start, let us pay our respect to the indigenous nations on whose traditional lands we gather here today. These territories hold centuries of history. It holds centuries of gatherings, and as well as centuries of celebrations. And we are more than grateful for the opportunity to live here and to work here and to prosper here as Black people. And additionally, we don't forget our ancestors. That's what we are all about, Afrocestor. Additionally, we honor our African ancestors who were true leaders themselves and whose resilience shaped our world. Mama Africa remains the birthplace of humanity, a source of strength, wisdom, and knowledge. Rowan, how are you really doing today?
I am so happy. It is a beautiful day here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada today. Walked in and had an amazing chat with everyone here. All the crew's here. Our staff are here. You guys are here. I'm just really happy to be on site with you today.
Yeah, you made it really very easy for me. Do you know why? I was like, are you sure Rowan will love the cameras? Are you sure Rowan will want to do this? Because again, we've seen people who are orators themselves. They can talk, they can address the public. But when it comes to camera, they're a little bit camera shy. And but again, I think I was telling Claire that I don't have a problem with lawyers because, you can wake them up and they will start talking
nonstop.
And it's not in a very bad way anyways. Yeah. So we're going to do all the talks today, and it's going to be on immigration.
Right.
And if I got it right, you're the managing lawyer, the division for immigration in Osuji and Smith
That's
Lawyers,
correct.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So today you're going to really tell us more about what this immigration is all about. Yeah. It's been one of the topics that most people have been asking about. We don't have those answers, but thank God we have you, an encyclopedia now of immigration. Yeah, so I have my own questions, and these questions were coming from a poll, right? Okay. And it's just in a bid to spur the conversations that we do have here. So feel free to tell us everything that you need to tell us about what we're doing. And usually people get confused about what temporary immigration is, or temporary immigration versus permanent immigration. Sure. So can you really break it down for our viewers and our listeners as well?
Sure, absolutely. We spend a lot of time working with both temporary residents and permanent residents. And the difference really is a status difference in Canada. A temporary resident permit or a temporary resident visa is actually designed to have someone here for a short period of time. It is designed, for example, for a student who wants to study in Canada. And so the permit is issued for the period of time that person is studying. So it's a limited time frame. Work permits have expiry dates on them as well. And it just means that you are temporary here in Canada for a particular reason. Whereas permanent residency, there is not an expiry date on that. The idea of permanent residency is that now you have established yourself in Canada, you want to spend a long-term time in Canada, and maybe now you're even looking at citizenship. Yeah. And the rights are slightly different as well. You know, if you are a permanent resident, you have a lot more ability to stay in Canada, even sometimes if you get into trouble. Temporary residence, the status is a little more uncertain. It's a little less stable. And so if something goes wrong, for example, you know, if there's some sort of, you know, criminal offense, even a low-level criminal offense can really impact and get you removed from Canada. It can happen to permanent residents as well, but it's not as much of a struggle. So a lot of the goal of temporary residence, of course, is to become permanent residents. And what we do a lot of is help people to move then from that temporary status to that permanent status and make sure they're planning well ahead for that process and for that journey.
Yeah. Speaking of goals, usually the end goal of permanent residence is to become a citizen.
Most often.
Yeah, most times.
Yes.
I've actually met someone who doesn't even want to be a citizen.
Oh,
He's
yes.
from the Philippines.
Yeah.
My former roommate in Toronto, and he has been here 11 years. And I'm like, what are you doing, man?
Well, some people too, if they're from countries where if they have dual citizenship, they're going to lose property rights or tax rights in their country of origin. They might not want to be a citizen of Canada for that reason. But that is a very sort of limited group of people, and a very small percentage, of course, of the people who are permanent residents. Many, of course, do want to become citizens in the end. Yeah, and for me, again, I think I would love to know what where someone who's visiting Canada or on tourist visa or visiting visa, as they say, where do these people fall into? What category? Are they still temporary? They are still temporary residents.
Yeah.
So temporary residents are people who are on study permits, people who are on visitor visas, or people who are on work permits. So those three categories are all temporary residents. There's also business visitor categories as well, and sort of slight variations on those three. But really, those are the top three large categories of temporary residents: students, visitors, workers.
Yeah, and we'll be going in depth into this in the coming weeks. The partnership that we have with Osuji and Smith Lawyers will allow us to have about 10 weeks of legal education, if you want to put it that way. So this is an introduction or the introductory phase. We're going to be talking more about this as time goes on. But then, if I spend, or rather I've seen a lot of temporary residents who happen to be in Canada for a longer time. Does their stay in Canada, or would their stay in Canada count towards their citizenship in the end? Because I think there's a number of times you need to stay as a permanent resident to, for example, students, they'll say, oh, you have to stay a little bit of time, then you add it to your permanent residency or something like that.
Okay, so this is complicated. And this is something that a lot of people have challenges with. So it's really important to separate the three groups, right? You've got temporary residents, the workers, the students, and the visitors. Then you have permanent residents who no longer qualify under those categories, even if they are doing those things. Of course, permanent residents are working. Permanent residents might be studying, but they're no longer considered temporary category. And then, of course, you have citizenship. So what happens is, in order to get permanent residency, there is a residency requirement to be able to get permanent residency. And then in order to get citizenship, there's a number of years you have to be in Canada. It's 3 of the last 5 for citizenship before you can get citizenship. So absolutely, the time spent in Canada, the time spent studying in Canada, the time spent working in Canada, all can go towards meeting these very, very detailed eligibility criteria for almost every program you could apply for permanent residency. Yeah,
I think you explained it even more than I could even wanted anybody to explain. I think you went straight to the point and all of that. And for our viewers, if you need any of these services, her number, or rather her contact details, are going to be on the screen, right? And Rowan, another question I do have, right, is the discussion about this express entry.
Sure.
You know, a whole lot of people are saying, what is this express entry all about? And I still don't have a particular word to explain what express entry is all about.
Okay.
And I've seen on my social media page, whenever someone sees you're in Canada, and I'm very sure that Imo as well, might also be experiencing such a thing. They ask, how do I get into Canada? How did you get into Canada? And I explained to them, usually I went through express entry. But then there's so many layers of express entry that I don't even know how to start explaining to them. So when it comes to moving here to work, right, for those who want to work, what do skilled workers need to know about programs like express entry?
Okay. So express entry is one of the federal government immigration programs. So all immigration in Canada is divided into two categories. We've got provincial programs and federal programs. Some of them are quite different from each other. Some of them are very similar to each other. Some have incredibly different eligibility criteria. Some of them have really similar eligibility criteria. So when you're looking at something like express entry, the first thing to know is, one, that it's federal jurisdiction, but two, it's actually 3 programs. It's not one program.
Really?
So the express entry program for overseas is a federal skilled worker program. The express entry program for people who are inside Canada and have already worked for a year is the Canadian experience class. So why this becomes very confusing is because online, on Facebook, talking to the cousin, talking to the grocer down the street, everyone's been applying for these different programs. They have different eligibility criteria. And so they're inadvertently giving each other bad advice because they're speaking from their own experience to someone who might not even qualify for that program. So express entry is 3 programs. Those are 2, Canadian experience class and the federal skilled worker class. And the other one is the trades class. So there's a whole entire program just for tradespeople like electricians and plumbers and all kinds of people who work in carpentry and those kinds of trades. So if you're not specialized in trades, you're looking at the other 2. If you're from outside of Canada, you're looking at the federal skilled worker program in express entry. This is a highly competitive program. What happens is you apply into a pool. So think of like a swimming pool. You jump into the pool and you swim around until the government picks you out. And they pick you out based on points. And this is where the competitiveness comes in. You get points for your education. You get points for your language skills. You can get points for your partner's education, language skills, and Canadian experience. You get points on how many years you've worked. There's all kinds of ways that points are built into the express entry system. Those with the highest points are the ones that get pulled out of the pool. So the points you need to get pulled out of a pool change all the time, depending on who's in the pool. They're pulling from the top. So at the moment, it is extraordinarily competitive, more competitive than it's been almost ever. And what that means is that people who have PhDs, people who have partners who also speak English and maybe French, maybe have studied here, maybe also have work experience here, both of them have job offers. These are the kinds of people who are getting pulled out of the pool at the moment. So what's really important for every individual looking at the federal skilled worker program in the express entry stream is to make sure they're calculating the points very, very carefully and make sure they've spoken to someone who understands whether or not it's actually valuable for them to apply for express entry right now. Because you only get 1 year in the pool. So if you only have 1 year in the pool and you're like flipping around, bloop, 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 you got to jump out of the pool in the year and you got to re-register. You got to redo your application. And it is such a waste of time and money. And I think what's really awful and what we see, because we often deal with immigration problems, is people coming to us who have been in the pool for 8-9 months. They know their pool time is expiring. And they come to us and they say, you know, I've been in the pool for 8 months. I just want to know why. Like, can I get out of the pool? Like, how am I going to get out of this pool? And we have a look at them. We do a full assessment of their background, their language, their family, their travel history. They're all the things you do for express entry. And there was no way that they were going to get pulled out of the pool. It just wasn't. They had enough money, like enough points to get into the pool, but they don't have enough points, and they were never going to get pulled out. And this is where the scams happen. And this is where people need to be very, very careful. So for everyone who's watching this, please make sure you're working with people who know how the point system works, who knows how to do really comprehensive assessments of you and your family, and that you know what the government is pulling at the moment. What are the predictions for the government going to be pulling in the coming year? Otherwise, you will have paid thousands of dollars. In some cases, we've seen people who have paid tens of thousands of dollars to make an application through an agent to get into a pool that they were never going to be pulled out of. And it's a scam.
Wow.
So be very careful, everyone. Please make sure you do a lot of research and you're working with the right people.
Yeah, amazing, because this is the reason why we're bringing this whole education, right?
Yeah.
But again, when you do have someone in that situation, how would you and your law firm really help to make sure that someone who is in the pool, because when we started this, I usually say that everything has a solution. Except maybe someone's demise or someone passing. But again, if someone comes to you and after the whole assessment, you and your team, sees the truth, which is
nope.
This guy, there's no hope, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything you can do for those kind of people
Absolutely.
to help them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things we pride ourselves on is we don't match programs to people. We match people to programs. We look and do full assessments. So if someone comes in the door and says, I want to do express entry. I'm like, all right, great. I'm so glad you want to do express entry. But here's the thing. There are lots and lots of provincial programs and maybe specific stream programs, depending on that person's like education background and work skills and what career they have, that they should also look at. Don't just look at one program. Just because someone did express entry, and just because that's the one program does not mean there aren't other programs that might be very valuable to you and that you might be able to apply for. And so we do an assessment to see, first of all, where does the person want to go? Do they have ties to any particular province? Do they have family? Have they ever been to Canada, visited before? Have they ever worked here before, studied here before? Does their heart feel like they really need to be in Alberta, for example? And so we look first at where people want to go. We look at the programs and the policies and new policy developments and new programs. Of course, these programs are developing all the time, especially in Alberta at the moment, to see if there's a really good fit for that person. And if express entry is the best route, that's what we will advise. If the Alberta program is the best route, we will advise on that. So we're not looking for, here's a program, here's a person. We're more looking for, hey, you're a human. You've got this really interesting background. You have this great skill set. You've got this very, diverse work experience. Where would you both best fit to get into Canada? Right? The goal is to come here, whether you come in on an express entry or whether you come in an Alberta program, whether you come in as a business visitor first, whether you come in even as a temporary worker first. And that's often a solution, is coming in as a temporary worker first. If you don't meet any permanent resident criteria, don't give up. See if you can find yourself a job in Canada. Okay, so we as lawyers, we don't do job hunting. We're not recruiters. We can't find you a job. But if you can get a job, go to the recruiters that work in your area, in your career in Canada, and find someone who can help you get a job. Get online, get onto the jobbank.ca, use the Kibby app, get onto LinkedIn, connect with people. If you get a job in Canada, you can then become a permanent resident through the fact that you've been working in Canada for a certain period of time. So there can be other solutions besides express entry. And to be honest, a lot of people right now are not qualifying for express entry. So finding other solutions is what we do every day as a team. Yeah,
the scores are too high right now. And I know that most people now went to the PMP, the Provincial Nominee Programs, and it seems like Alberta is trying to say that, oh no, we don't want you coming to Alberta anymore. So what's happening right now with the whole Alberta PMP?
There's a huge shift right now in Alberta because we're so short of certain workers in certain sectors.
Okay.
So we really need people in construction. We really need people in hospitality. And we really need people in healthcare. So the government was looking at the program and looking at certain parts of the program. Because remember, Alberta PMP is multiple programs, right? We've got 14 programs at the moment. So it's not just one thing. Alberta PMP is not one program. Depending who you are, where your education is from, all of those things, there are multiple programs that someone might be able to apply for in Alberta. But yes, the big change was the Alberta Opportunity Stream when that was taken off the shelf. So at the moment, this program called Alberta Opportunity Stream is on pause. And that was a really wonderful program because it included what they call low skill, which I think is a bit of a misnomer, of course, because who's low skill? So low skill or low wage jobs were included in the Alberta Opportunity Stream. They are not included in the federal streams. Right. So federal streams are for what we call tiers 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to talk about tiers in a later segment when we go into all the sort of little tiny details about how programs work and how immigration works in Canada. But there are lots of options. It's just there's a bit of shift of vision at the moment in Alberta. So we're hoping that rebalances again and we'll be able to still bring in a lot more people as workers for permanent residency to Alberta. Remember, that's a PR program, though. That is not for temporary residents. Temporary residency is jurisdiction for the federal government. So they're very different programs. So we can still bring people in as low-skill workers through temporary worker programs, of course, right? But the problem is then how do you get permanent residency? That's the challenge.
Because I think there's been a lot of questions in our community about LMIA.
Yes.
Yes. So, and I can't remember what, I think LMIA is what, I don't know what it stands for, but I know it has to stand for something assessment in the end or something.
Labor.
Like.
Market. Impact. Assessment.
Yeah, I know. I can remember the assessment part. Yeah.
Now, and that is not a visa. So this is another thing that people often confuse is they call their permit, the work permit, an LMIA. And that's not actually the LMIA. It is a work permit based on an LMIA. An LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment, is the assessment the government does of an employer to allow them to hire a foreign worker. So there's no employer in Canada who cannot hire under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is a very specific program, unless they have an LMIA. There are lots of LMIA exempt programs as well for temporary workers. So you have LMIA program and then you have non or LMIA exempt programs. So the first question is, do I need an LMIA based work permit? That's question one that we have a look at. So the questions around LMIAs is really questions about either employers, LMIAs, or about the work permits themselves, which are based on the LMIA.
Oh, amazing. And do you know how the discussion is free-flowing that I don't even have to look at some of the questions I wanted to ask you?
You can still ask those.
I can still ask
hijack your whole
but that's amazing because then this is actually what we want because it's more like we want to run this as a curriculum where we pick up one topic and we discuss it in depth. We don't just want to give a blanket discussion on things.
And I'm so excited to have this as like an introduction to these kinds of topics because when we go into these in more depth, people will be like, oh yeah, she mentioned that in that first segment. But today we'll stay very general and just sort of gloss over kind of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I know my pathway to Canada was express entry. And to be very honest with you, I didn't take it very seriously. At the time, they told me that I was, I've forgotten some of these terms. I used to have them in my head. But I think it's notice of what? It's not notice of assessment. Invitation to apply.
Invitation to apply.
ITA. When they sent me my ITA, and I was like, this is scam. Because the truth is, I was doing it without a lawyer. I was doing it without any professional. I did it. So my friend just told me about it, and I was like, okay, let's try. So I wrote my IELTS, and I got the score. I think then it was 404, whatever. I think I've forgotten what my score was in express entry.
When did you come into the country?
It was 2018.
Okay, everything's changed.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, so be really careful, right? Because your experience was so unique and it was so you and it was of that time now 6 years ago.
Yes.
Right? And so it has been a lot easier in the past to be able to navigate these programs. And also immigration is easier for high skilled, high educated, work, have lots of work experience, who have high IELTS scores. That is what the express entry program is for, right? Is for people like you who are coming in. So for so many people, they just don't have the criteria. They don't have the eligibility criteria to be able to meet the
age is the issue for most of the people I know.
Yeah, and just we'll go through an express entry, segment at some point, but age really does impact your score.
So another question I really have for you, Rowan, is I'm really trying to not call you Rowan. Rowan, I have a friend who's Rowan. I'm a very good friend. We still keep in touch. One of the people I stayed with in Toronto that gave me lots of love. Rowan, if you're seeing this,
Hi,
you
Rowan.
know, yeah, there's a lot of them. Zach Montesano, Woodbridge and Vaughan was amazing to me before I came down to one of the coldest part of Canada, which is Calgary. But then let's move on from this. I've seen a lot of people who come into Canada, the pathway of PMP, Provincial Nomination, and they always give that excuse, or rather that is their experience. That is their reality, that they couldn't find a job. Now they are torn in between, should I move out of the province that really nominated me to another province? Or should I just stay back and maybe try to know if I will stay on EI or some... I've seen a lot.
Yes.
I've seen medical doctors doing factory jobs.
It's such a hard decision for anyone.
What impact does it have towards their getting citizenship at some point? Does it haunt them at the tail end of things, or can they move?
So it depends who we're talking about here, right? Yeah. Temporary residents or PRs?
PRs.
Okay, so for PRs, no. Once you get your permanent residency, you are a permanent resident of Canada. Okay. You have a right of movement between provinces that's actually constitutionally enshrined in Canada. You have the right to move provinces. However, if you've applied through a specific PNP program and a province has brought you in, and you have made lots and lots and lots and lots of claims about why you're coming to that province and, you know, what you're doing there and why BC over Alberta, and you've convinced the BC government, especially if they're going to pick you out of the pool during a conjoint express entry program, like a PNP express entry program, you just want to be very careful of misrepresentation. Yeah. So misrepresentation is just a big word for the government taking issue with information or documents that were provided to the government at any point during your immigration journey in Canada, whether that was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or yesterday. So misrepresentation is a grounds for inadmissibility. So if you have inaccurate information, or provided documents that are not correct, or if they think you're just not telling the truth, it can be alleged against you that you've committed misrepresentation. Yeah. So you just want to have good reason. If you're going to move provinces, you know, you want to be able to, if anyone ever asked you, you want to be able to say, well, I couldn't get a job. Yeah. That is a completely valid reason. You thought you were coming here because of this job, and maybe you lost that job. Maybe you thought you were going to come here because you were told there was going to be a job for you, and you showed up and there wasn't a job for you. There's all kinds of reasons why people can't stay in the province. So that's misrepresentation
from the part of the government, right? Yeah, I think they should have a way of us balancing these things so that it's not only the other side. This
is why people hire lawyers, right? It's to try and do that balancing a little bit.
I forgot I was talking to a lawyer.
You know, there are mistakes made, and there also are ways to talk to the government about specific problematic situations. Yeah. And demonstrate through evidence that there's a reason why this person should stay in Canada anyway. Yeah. You know, so as far as moving provinces, don't worry about it. If you've got a good reason to move a province, move a province. That's not an issue. But you have made a commitment. You did sign on the dotted line to that province that you were interested in coming to that province. Okay. So efforts are needed to be made and shown that you tried to stay in that province, of course, right? Yeah. Because that province picked you. And they picked you over somebody else. You have taken someone's spot. So, you know, if you bring back to sort of just ethics and our own way of operating in the universe, you have taken another person's spot who's sitting in the pool because you got picked by a province, right?
Life is hard.
So life is hard. Yeah. I know that's one way of looking at it. But I think also, I think it's being reasonable. I think it's trying to plan ahead and those kinds of things. But you know, as far as what we can do when there are problems, when there is inadmissibility, if there's misrepresentation, if there's criminal inadmissibility, medical inadmissibility is also common. That's when we really go to bat. That's when having a lawyer is really, really important to be able to have that discussion and that dialogue with government to demonstrate why you should still stay in Canada. Either through reconsideration requests or through making appeals or going through a judicial review process. Yeah. All of these we will talk about in later segments, just so you know. We will do one just probably on inadmissibility coming forward. So we'll get there.
Definitely. And I'm looking forward to that a lot. But before I ask some of the questions that I do have in mind, I think the integral part of what lawyers like you and Osuji and Smith lawyers do is part of it is more of advocacy. Is that right?
Yeah. So we advocate in all kind of different ways. When you say advocacy, what kind of comes to mind for you?
Yeah. So I'm looking at, there's been this discussion on Twitter, immigrants, especially from English-speaking countries, still asking what is actually the need for the IELTS,
the IELTS,
the English proficiency examination, especially when it expires within 2 years.
Right.
So, I mean, there's been this on and off. In fact, I was on Clubhouse and I was just listening when we wanted to know the kind of topic people want on this. Yeah. And there's a lot of people who were from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Gambia, those who have been taught, since their kindergarten.
I have a friend who's an English lawyer from the UK, of course, had to do an IELTS.
So what's the rationale behind that? Like, what's the justification for that?
Standardization. It means there's no discretion. There's no subjective analysis of who should come in and who shouldn't based on nationality, based on where you went to school, based on all the other things that might impact your language skills, where you were brought up. All of those would mean the government would have to interact with each person and assess them anyway to see whether their English was actually what they're saying, right? Because just because you're born in a certain country, just because you went to school in a particular country, doesn't guarantee that you will have the English language skills that are required to be an architect in Canada, right? It doesn't guarantee that just because you were born in an English-speaking country. Yeah. And also, a lot of people come at different times in their lives to different countries and they get citizenship. So you could say, okay, all citizens of X country, we're not going to do English tests for them. All citizens of that country. Well, then Canada has to look at, well, what is the criteria for citizenship in that country? Do they have language tests? Because people can be moving into that country as a citizen from a country overseas that doesn't speak English or French, right? Because English or French, you can do English or French in Canada for your tests and for eligibility criteria. So what it does is if you don't have a standardized test to test English and French, which we have both, then the Canadian government has to go through a whole long process to try and figure out whether the language is going to meet the requirement of the businesses and the employers and the industries in Canada that need different ranges or have different language range requirements. So it basically cuts it off at the pass. It basically says, here you go. Instead of the Canadian, can you imagine how slow the immigration system would be if Canada had to negotiate and figure out the English level of every person? It would be so hard.
So it's already slow, I think, now. So making it even slower is not something we all want. However, the discussion, and again, I'll bring it back to our viewers, which is the official language in Canada is English and French. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So that you know, so you can either write the CELPIP, IELTS, and the rest of them, or
TES, the French,
the equivalents in French as well. But then the discussion has not been to scrap IELTS. The thing is that if you're coming from countries in West Africa, Mid East Asia, and some even Central Asia, express entry is a very, very expensive venture to go into, to be very honest with you. Although it's an investment, what I'm saying is that it costs you a whole lot in the long run doing that. So people are saying that part of the ways to cut this cost would be if the English proficiency exam can even be for 5 years. Is it possible that I tested for 2 years and all of a sudden I no longer have to speak or know how to speak English in the next 5 years? So these are some of the discussions that was coming up.
And that's absolutely being brought to the government, 100%.
I hope they listen.
Extending that 100%. So I'm the chair of the immigration division for the Canadian Bar Association in Southern Alberta. And we do a lot of talking, with government as the Canadian Bar Association with regards to advocacy for different members of the immigrant community in Canada and outside Canada. And IELTS is definitely one of the topics that we chat about. So it's on the agenda, it's on the books. Scrapping it is not going to happen. But whether or not it could be extended so that if you're in the pool for a year, You don't have to worry, if you've got a year and a half old IELTS, all of a sudden now you have to write another IELTS and then you have to resubmit it, on the portal and
and all of those kind of things. Yeah.
So there's lots of really interesting fixes that are being discussed. And it's part of the reason why immigration changes in Canada so much is through advocacy. It's through groups of people, including lawyers, including law associations, and including community groups and resettlement organizations. There's lots of people in the immigrant space working very, very hard to try and advocate for immigrants, whether they're temporary workers, migrant workers, whether they're out of status people, whether they're refugees or, skilled workers coming in through express entry.
Yeah, speaking of refugees, I know that one of the things that Canada have been committed to us for a very long time, reading the history of Canada, is taking in family reunion on top of the thing, on top of everything. Then you're talking about taking in refugees and the rest of them. But we'll talk about family sponsorship or family reunion, right? Rowan, the problem we're having, right, is that a lot of families have really been in a lot of troubles because one of the spouse is in Canada and the other one is there. Families have been broken, a whole lot of things. Yeah. And it has been painfully very slow to sponsor your spouse.
This is over a year and a half at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Usually, I know that, just like you said, a lot of things changed. I know back in 2018, 2019, before COVID, actually, I think COVID messed this whole thing up. Yeah, before COVID, it takes about 6 months. In fact, at the time, I knew people who were having their spouse come, I think it's called dual intent, having their spouse come here on visiting visa. Mm-hmm. And after a while, they just put in their application. It used to work back in 2018, at least. Yeah. I know this. So can you tell us about this family sponsorship? What is it all about? And is it only permanent residents can bring in their spouse when they're in Canada? Or if you're a student, you're in temporary immigration status, can you still bring in your spouse?
This is a very big question with lots of different details in it, which is fantastic. So we'll definitely deep dive into what's happening with study permits versus what's happening to permanent residents with regards to family sponsorship, because both changed. So now with students, as a lot of students have found out, going forward, they're not going to be able to bring their partners in unless they're in higher level education programs. Okay. For permanent residents, it's different.
What is a higher level education?
Master's or PhD at this point. Okay. Yeah, at this point. Okay. Now, this may change again very quickly because there's a lot of advocacy being done on behalf of students because of the changes to sponsorship. Well, it's not sponsorship, to bringing spouses over. Yeah. So there's lots of different answers to that depending on you as a student. So when we do our student segment, we'll deep dive into that. Permanent residents and citizens can both bring their spouses into Canada. Okay. So it's very different from temporary residents. Temporary workers can also bring spouses in certain situations, in certain kinds of positions and certain kind of permits. They can also bring spouses in. Yeah. Permanent residents, you can bring your married spouse, so we call spouse, so that's someone who has a marriage certificate. You can bring your partner, which can be a same-sex partner or unisex partner. Yeah. You can also bring what we call conjugal partner, which is a partner who you've been separated from for reasons often of war or maybe religion or all kinds of reasons why you might not be able to be together with your partner. So those three groups count as partners in Canada. Spouses, common law partners, so you have to have lived with your partner for a year, or conjugal partners, which are partners who have been separated.
Yeah, amazing. Rowan, let me tell you the truth, right? There's usually something that, I don't know if you've heard this, it came from the transfiguration on Mount Tabor, right? And it's biblical anyways, but that's because Peter saw Jesus Christ transfigured, right? And decided that he wants to stay there and build 3 tents. So left for me alone, I want to, borrow that particular figure of speech that I want to have tents here, one for you, one for me, and maybe one for every other person who's here. But for want of time, we will not be able to go in depth in a lot of things. And thank God we have 10 weeks to discuss this in depth. Yes. So this is just an introduction. This is just to tell our viewers what this is all about, then get their views in the comment section. and then we implement some of those things moving forward. However, I would love to know, and I know that our viewers that itching to know who Rowan Fisher is. So tell us about what you've done in Saudi Arabia. Tell us about those deserts. Tell us about why we need to also visit Saudi Arabia.
Okay, absolutely. So I was in Saudi Arabia on and off for about 7 years, and I enjoyed the experience very, very much. Professionally, it was very exciting. It was a really interesting place to work. People from all over the world, there's almost 1 million expats, in Saudi Arabia working. I had so many Saudi friends. I worked for the Saudi Central Bank in one of their training divisions, and just absolutely made wonderful friends. And I was invited to weddings and celebrations and Eid and out to farms in the deserts and desert experiences. I had friends who camp a lot and who go climbing and horseback riding. And I had a adventure of a lifetime in Saudi Arabia. And it was wonderful. It just got to the point where it was time for me to come home. And that was part of my transformation into becoming an immigration lawyer. I had in a past life been an energy lawyer. And I had a few years before leaving Saudi Arabia, I went and volunteered in a refugee camp in Greece. And this was an Afghan refugee camp, and it was an inland camp just outside of Athens. So people would come in by boats, get picked off boats and out of the sea into sort of waterway camps. And then they were moved inland to the camp that I was working in. And it was an incredible experience. And I was loving living in Saudi Arabia at the time. But I realized that I have some skills and I have compassion. And I wanted to really help people. And, my mom's getting older, my niece is getting older, and I hadn't lived in Canada for a decade before I was in Saudi Arabia. I was in London in the UK. And so I decided to come home. And part of that process was coming home to become an immigration lawyer. And so that's what I did. I did all kinds of different certifications in international law and refugee law from the UK. I did an immigration certificate here in Canada. I was very, very lucky to have incredible mentors, leaders in the immigrant community, here in Calgary and in the immigration legal community. And I joined all the boards and I joined all the associations I could. And I basically trained into being an immigration lawyer through guts and passion. That was it.
How are you enjoying it so far?
And I have loved it. I loved it. I started my own law firm to begin with, and then joined Osuji and Smith and brought my whole team in here on February 1st this year. And now we are growing and developing one of the bigger immigration divisions really in Western Canada. And we're super excited to be working together and be working with all of you to help you on your immigration journeys.
Thank you so much, because I remember very much when Charles came to our podcast, which is actually available as well on our YouTube as well. We'll be releasing that for public view very soon. It happened that I saw the way his face glowed when he talked about immigration. He was telling us that in a few weeks to come, that he's gonna, he mentioned it like 2 or 3 times, and I was like, oh right, because you could see the way he was really very ecstatic about it.
Oh, we were so excited to do this. Yes. It just made sense. Osuji and Smith has, 25 different languages, all religions of the world, people from all over the world, and yet didn't have their own immigration division. And so not only have we brought an immigration division into Osuji and Smith, we are now blending that and integrating that, of course, fully into the whole team. We're all one big happy family now, and we're growing the team with Osuji and Smith lawyers who have always wanted to practice immigration law. And they're joining us. And so we're building this fantastic team. And Charles and I have a lot of synergy when it comes to community work and advocacy. He and I are on multiple boards. We both do lots of pro bono work. We present on panels. We knew each other from community before we even knew each other, in the context of working together. And it was through that relationship, that professional community relationship, that we realized that this was something we had to do.
Yeah, this is amazing. I really love this because, again, if you look at things very much well, you see that there's in Calgary at the moment, and I think in Toronto as well, in most of the major cities in Canada generally, and some of the provinces. DEI is becoming diversity, equity, inclusion topics have been taken very seriously.
Yeah.
We went to March 18th and 19th, the Anti-Racism Justice Conference.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah, we were there, and you could see how everybody wants to be part of this discussion. Yeah, and to see that you guys here in Osuji and Smith Lawyers are as well, walking the talk, it goes a very long way. So, but like I said, I wish we can have time. Our guest speaker here today can talk about these topics for the next 5 years. So I hope the problem is we don't have enough energy to sit, to eat, to bathe, to do things and keep talking about immigration. But that's what she does every time. That's what they do here in Osuji and Smith. And for that, we thank our host, Osuji and Smith Lawyers, and our guest speaker as well, Rowan Fisher, for this amazing, amazing stuff. For me, I didn't know how to start asking lawyers questions. So I was a little bit tensed, but immediately she walked into the room, I was like, okay, fine. I can relate with her, and then we can ask questions and we can have all the fun. Remember, she's a managing lawyer for the Immigration Division of the Osuji and Smith Lawyers. And most importantly, we want to say a very big thank you to our incredible viewers. We are really nothing without you guys. Please help us spread this message by commenting, by liking, by subscribing and sharing this content. It has a long way to help us to get those views so that people can see this as well. So this is a non-profit WMLG Foundation. This is a non-profit initiative. And we would love to say that what we bring to our African community is usually very quality, because you can see from her resume, from talking about herself, she's been everywhere. She's done that in 2 continents, right? Correct?
Australia,
Europe.
England,
You added
Europe.
Australia. So there's a lot of continents here. We don't want to go into that.
I carry 3 passports.
Yeah, 3 passports. So you can see the quality of the people that we do have here. So please, the least you can do is tell your neighbors about this. Tell your brothers, tell your sisters about what we do here. And as well, if you need any information, all the contact details are there. And also their website, right? Go to Osuji and Smith Lawyers. They've been winning all the awards there is in Alberta. So sometimes when I was introducing Charles, I didn't know where to start from. Go to family law, they have an award, there. You go to, not immigration, I think the other one.
Immigration,
civil
immigration, we've got Community Champion Awards. We've got all kinds of other things as well.
So we don't want to hear about those awards. Go to their website. You're going to see a lot of all these things, and also support what we do as well in Afrocestor. So let's conclude today's conversation by honoring our ancestors and seeking their guidance to understand the deep creative intelligence and the life force within us. My name is Amari. I don't think I want to change that name anytime soon. So I would love to say stay safe, stay fit, stay African, Ubuntu.
Afrocestor.